Okay, we're going.
Hello and welcome. I'm Becky with Malvern Books. We're thrilled to be hosting this event along with Awst Press to celebrate the publication of new books from these three wonderful authors, Donald Quist, Andrew Yoon, and Esteban Rodríguez. Just as an aside, Awst Press is an independent literary publisher here in Austin, Texas, featuring impressive work from diverse voices. 2 of the 4 books they published this year are featured tonight. To Those Bounded by Donald Quist, and We Are Invited to Climb by Andrew Yoon. They also published Edward M. Cohen's Before Stonewall and Brian Philip Whalen's Semiotic Love Stories earlier this year. First of all, we'll hear from Andrew Yoon. Andrew is a New York-based Korean-American artist involved in music, poetry, and computers. Lately, he's writing poems that change, making music with paint and dance, live coding sounds, and leading the Melodica drone and Bach orchestra. He is the founder of the arts journal and small press, Nothing to Say. As a free culture advocate, everything he makes is under copyleft licenses, including this collection. Andrew?
Thanks for that lovely introduction, Becky. I'm so excited to be here and a little nervous to kick us off with such excellent writers coming after me. So I'm gonna do my best, okay? So yeah, I'm gonna be reading a few poems from a collection. I think this might be backwards in the Zoom mirror.
It's okay.
It looks kind of cool. It's called We Are Invited to Climb. It's a collection, it's a short little pocket book of poems that are, I call them chance poems. They're partly generated with computers, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about what that means later, but for now, I think I'm just gonna read a little bit. So I'm going to start off with the title poem from the collection, which is also the first one. And its title is We Are Invited to Climb. New and old us met today. We ask what month it is. It doesn't matter. We ask if we are happy, and it matters. We ask how many rows are crossed off on our list of things we'll never do, and we learn about a whole new list. The plant in our window is starting to dry out in those longer leaves that grow over the pot, and we've run out of money on our subway card. These are the side effects of change. The things none of us were looking for. The things which contain the world and that gray chasm whose walls are so far that we float around between them. A valley above us, a bird flock below. The grid lines are laughing in a genuine kind of way, and we feel a strange compassion in the scale of it all. What does change look like? Does it have a smell? The sky poems are wider now. Those upside down kites whose strings reach into the clouds. We've been looking for one that brings us together, but mostly we've just found nonsense. The kite strings go taut, then slack, then taut again. We are invited to climb. And I'll be reading another one from a little bit later on in the collection. Incidentally, I'm actually going in chronological order through the book, which was totally by accident when I was picking out these selections. So just a little fun fact. This one is titled, We Accidentally Imagine. We accidentally imagine ourselves having for a head this strangely shaped box or a bird feeder with a triangular roof or something, and we are sitting in the passenger seat of an old car, and someone we care a lot about asks, "Who are we?" And we think for a minute, and then another. We can't seem to answer with anything except a held hand, and somehow we find ourselves caring more about them just because they asked. They can't answer either, but their grip is getting tighter and they aren't making eye contact. But that's okay because we aren't looking anyway, and we are both these strange wooden boxes attached to bodies, heads without eyes which still say so much, eyes with old laughing lines which still find new things to smile about. A crisply turned book page, a window pitter-patter, a warm lamp switching on, laughing about nothing in particular and everything in particular, wanting to want everything and wanting to want nothing, to feel everything and to feel nothing, or at least something. The grip is getting tighter, and we remember that hiding is okay sometimes, and being naked is okay too. That sometimes things lead to other things, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes things just happen, and they keep just happening, and they don't stop. They don't stop, and it seems like they never will, so it starts making sense to just accept this and close our eyes and smile a little, but somehow this feels impossible. We get frustrated and start doing things we don't want to, blaming other people for things they didn't have control over in the first place and jumping to conclusions, making assumptions about other people and their intentions and what they want or what they're afraid of. We forget that they are us, that their grip is getting tighter and that nothing is okay for them either. We remember that their boxy head is crying a little and we've been trying not to notice. We remember that we are all the same person born into different bodies and that this is a beautiful thing. This is a beautiful thing. And the next one also is titled The First Few Words. I'm not going to read it. The smell of damp sticks from outside, a slow-moving sound. We notice how everything is so pink and green, and how the cars driving by sound like trees. We ask if it can stay this way for a while. It does. And I'm going to read just one more from this collection, and then I think time permits me to read some work in progress stuff as well. So this one is called We Try to Imagine. We try to imagine what it would sound like if the leaves on every tree were poems written on little sheets of paper, and everyone in the world started reading from them out loud at the same time, and then the wind began to blow, and the poems went flying in the air, and everybody just sort of smiled and watched and let it happen. We think about how most of our questions don't matter when there are so many beautiful and confusing things all around us. We just keep quiet laughing and grabbing for words, sometimes keeping them and other times giving them to people nearby. We try to catch a poem and miss, but we aren't so disappointed. The wind needs poems too. And I think I have time. So these poems are written with a computer generative process that lets me kind of set out the scaffolding for the poem, or the skeleton, if you will, and leave a lot of the individual details and words up to chance. So I've been working on things in this vein for a while, including this book, which is definitely the biggest kind of project along these lines that I've done so far. But going forward, I'm starting to think about other things. In particular, I've been working on the sort of interpretation / translation of the Taoist text, the Tao Te Ching. And for those not familiar with it, this is the foundational text of Taoism, written thousands of years ago, and it's written in ancient Chinese characters. So it's famously impossible to perfectly translate into other languages because it's so vague and kind of open to interpretation. So any kind of translation is necessarily also an interpretation of the text. And I realized that this is kind of a really great opportunity to apply these same types of methods to a translation / interpretation. So I've been working on, maybe you could call it a translation. So every time you regenerate it, you get a whole new version of a translation. So I have just one for today that I'm going to be reading, but I'm going to read maybe 2 or 3 different versions of it, so you can kind of see the way that it changes in each version. So this is number 5, or chapter 5 from the Tao Te Ching. And I just pressed some buttons and it just generated. I've never seen this version before. So heaven and earth are not humane. To them, the 10,000 things are straw dogs. Wise souls are not humane. To them, the 100 students are straw dogs. But isn't the space between heaven and earth like a bellows? Empty, yet structured. It moves, inexhaustibly giving. Yet words inevitably go silent. Hold on to the center. Heaven and earth are ruthless. To them, the myriad creatures are straw dogs. Wise souls are ruthless. To them, the 100 teachers are straw dogs. Are not heaven and earth like a bellows? Empty yet structured, worked, yet the wind still blows. Yet the force of words is soon spent. Keep to the center. And one more. Heaven and earth are not humane. To them, the 10,000 things are straw dogs. Wise souls are not humane. To them, the 100 students are straw dogs. Yet, heaven and earth and all that lies between are like an accordion. Empty yet structured, worked yet singing without end. Yet the force of words is soon spent. Hold fast to the center.
That was great. So interesting. The generation of that with the computer, and it's a beautiful compilation. And when it actually is written that way, that's amazing. I mean, your own poetry, the first poetry read were wonderful too, but it's so intriguing that you were doing this with this computer generation and how everyone was different and yet the same. I mean, it had the same kind of feeling.
Yeah. If I can make a brief plug related to the book, if that kind of work is interesting to people, the book exists also in a digital form at weareinvitedtoclimb.org. And every time a reader goes there, it regenerates the entire book for you in the same way that I've been making new versions of this Tao Te Ching chapter for you all. So every time you go to this website, it's just going to make a whole new book for you that will include these poems that I was just reading, but in a different way. A lot of the details will shift and kind of change around you, and you can play with it and explore the different versions. So one last time, that's weareinvitedtoclimb.org.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to see if I can. So our next reader, and I'm trying to figure out, here we go. Our next reader is Esteban Rodríguez. Esteban is the author of 5 poetry collections, most recently The Valley from Sundress Publications in 2021, and the essay collection Before the Earth Devours Us from Split Lip Press, also from this year. He is the interviews editor for EcoTheo Review, senior book reviews editor for Tupelo Quarterly, and associate poetry editor for AGNI. He currently lives in Central Texas. Esteban?
Thank you so much, Becky. Becky and I were joking a little bit before y'all came on, right before, at least like when the pandemic hit Austin. I had a reading that day, so it's kind of like good to come back and I guess like full circle. Pandemic's not over, but we're almost there, I think. I want to start off by, again, thanking Becky and Joe from Malvern Books. Thank you, Andrew, beautiful poems. Thank you, Donald. Thank you, Phoebe from Awst Press. And thank you everyone for showing up. I'm going to be reading what I think has become perhaps my favorite essay in my debut collection, Before the Earth Devours Us. And it's an essay titled Pallbearers. And my mother is one of 9 children. My grandparents had 6 daughters and 3 sons. 2 were twins, and then we had like the oldest, my uncle, who's the oldest. But when my grandfather passed away, part of what he left in his will was that he wanted his 6 daughters, all my aunts and my mother, to be the pallbearers at his funeral, which meant that they had to carry his casket from the church service to the hearse, and then when they got to the cemetery, from the hearse to the gravesite. And it was really interesting that day in general, just sort of the days leading up to that, but that day in general just kind of seared in my memory and whatnot. And this is my perspective. I was quite young, but just my perspective, and this is the opening paragraphs for this particular essay. Pallbearers. I thought the wailing would never stop. The wails of my mother, grandmother, my uncles and aunts. The wails of unknown relatives whose names I forgot, the moment they leaned over, rubbed my cheeks or shoulders, and introduced themselves when they first arrived at the funeral home as so-and-so. Telling my mother how much I looked like my grandfather, how they were surprised that I shared the same features that defined him. A light complexion, an oval-shaped head, an overall demeanor that brought to mind the most casual of interactions, and that prompted what I can now see as a sigh of relief spreading across their faces, expressing how comforted they were that at least someone in the family embodied the memory of his physical characteristics. Since the image we all attached to the man, the descriptions that came to mind when his name was mentioned, was just as important as every intangible impression he left behind. Before my relatives, however, pulled away, each becoming another indistinguishable figure among the crowd, taking their sympathy with them, I stared curiously at the dark and hieroglyphic folds and wrinkles webbed from their foreheads to their cheeks, jaws, chins, and down into the sharp cliffs of their necks, where the skin sagged just enough for my 10-year-old mind to think that in a few weeks' time, that hanging flap of flesh would turn into a full-fledged waddle. They all appeared to already be gobbling, mumbling sentences that in between the sniffs, the sighs, the tears that were unable to find a meaningful path made no sense. I couldn't understand the subtleties of their body language. I couldn't infer an explanation when they said complicado, tan complicado. And although I knew the English equivalent, it was still difficult to tease out what they meant when their lips, dry, thin, foaming at the corners with saliva, sounded like a broken wind-up box that dwindled but never ended. Complicado, tan complicado. In the reception room, the mood was mournful, but the kind of mournful that goes out to eat after the burial, sits at a table and orders a bacon cheeseburger, extra fries, a large soda, and a brownie a la mode that on any other day would have been skipped for the check. I had not yet learned to compartmentalize my feelings in that manner, had not yet found solace in silence, or in short, cliche quotes echoing that life goes on sentiment that seemed to have put everyone at ease in the room, where I stood watching more family members file in, noting the formulaic manner in which their limbs moved when they embraced each other, nodded their heads, forced a smile that was adequate for the somber disposition created by the dimmed lamps and lights, the gray carpet that looked like elephant hide, and the brown sunken sofas positioned at each corner. The sofas were like the ones at my stepfather's funeral, and just as I had studied them back then, I studied these particular leather cushions now, certain they carried the scent of lint-speckled pants, jeans, shirt tails, jackets, pea coats, black pantyhose, different size hands resting and pushing off of them. A whole history of temporary sitters that took a break from the ritual before getting back up and fulfilling the role they were expected to fulfill. Everything in that room, from the desk to the water fountains that spurted back on themselves, regardless of how hard someone pushed, had a history to share. And it demanded that we share ours too, that we let this room hold the nuances of our actions long after we had left. Though I tried not to personify it, to see the room merely as a space that wouldn't capture what occurred that day, I knew it would bear the conversations, the head tilts, the head shakes, the embraces, the shifting and restless postures, the muffled laughs, the shoes scraping across the carpet, the thud of the doors opening, closing, opening, and the uncanny sense spilling from the main room that we had all been here before in some shape or form. It felt like deja vu, and that sensation carried over to the church, the same church where throughout middle school, I attended CCD every Wednesday, sat with Bobby and Luis making dick jokes about the saints and random authority figures painted across the ceiling, suggesting that the small bumps on their robes look larger than the bumps on our crotches. We'd bow our heads, feign another prayer, kneel in the pew, look up as though we were receiving divine intervention, and criticize Jesus's loincloth, saying that it wasn't wrinkled and rugged enough for someone who appeared to have been whipped, sentenced, ridiculed, and forced to drag a cross for miles upon miles across Roman land. It looked too perfect, ordered, all the paintings did, and there was no lesson these poorly rendered, half-clothed men, immortalized in brushstrokes, could instill in us when all we wanted to do was talk, make each other laugh, speak about the latest girl we liked, and pretend to feel as though we were sinners only when the sermon was about to end. The funeral priest looked hazy, disfigured like a cubist painting or an out-of-focus Polaroid found behind the plastic sheets of photo albums taken out only when distant relatives visited. Mere flashes of his face remain, the bushy eyebrows, the cracked and clay-colored skin that resembled roadside pottery no one ever bought, the angle at which his neck twisted inside that clerical collar as he looked side to side, addressed the seated congregation for no more than 15 minutes, slowly building up my grandfather's life, describing his character as though he knew him personally, saying, Santiago was aware of his sins, knew the faults he had as a father, as a man, and yet his outlook on the world remained devoutly Catholic. My grandfather never attended church, at least not that I knew of. But the priest's words were enough to move my family, to get them to start crying, coughing, contorting their seated bodies in the same nervous manner reserved for children. And as I sat there imagining what it must feel like to talk about someone whose organs had been removed, whose embalmed flesh would rot in a casket, and who lived his last few years nearly blind, limited to the light that filtered through the yellowish film of discharge that lined his eyes, the priest again commented on what a great man, what a fair father, what a loving husband he was, inciting the wells from my mother, my grandmother, my uncles and aunts, and from unknown relatives whose tears at the funeral home now appeared beyond their control. I remember speeding down the aisle with my sister Iris, who 4 years younger than me and dressed in the same black puffy dress she'd used for more than one Walmart family photo, seemed just as unsure as I was if that was all there was to this fast food version of a service. I was expecting the priest to conduct the ceremony at the gravesite, for the scene at the gravesite to play out the way it does in films, focusing first on the priest or priest-like figure who, in a stoic and baritone voice, methodically recites scripture, becomes deep, speaks over the claps of thunder, and crosses both himself and the deceased beneath the black umbrella as the camera moves at different angles throughout the crowd, zooming in on the slashes of rain that offer the perfect segue for the scene to slowly fade out. For a moment, I thought I smelled the scent of rain, but it was merely the collective perspiration that followed us down the church aisle and toward the open doors, where I could already see the column remains, remnants of clouds spreading away from each other, finding more importance elsewhere. Thank you all so much.
Wow, that was wonderful, Esteban. Thank you. Thank you so much. And it really brings back, you did a wonderful job of capturing so much of the service and yet so much of the life of each person there and how everyone is, what people are like at that kind of situation. And it's very universal in that, but also strikes close to me as well as having come from
Thank you. Thank you
that
so
same
much.
culture. Thank you so much. All right, our next reader will be Donald Quist. Donald is the author of Harbors, a Foreword Indies Bronze winner and International Book Awards finalist. He has a linked story collection for Other Ghosts. His writing has appeared in AGNI, North American Review, Michigan Quarterly Review, The Rumpus, and was notable in Best American Essays of 2018. He is the creator of the online nonfiction series Past 10. He is director of the MFA program in writing at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Donald?
Thank you. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Esteban. You all are beautiful artists, and I am honored to be able to share the space with you. Thank you to all of you that showed up here tonight. I am truly grateful, and yeah, I just feel very fortunate to be here. So thank you. So a little background. I wrote a literary triptych. And what I mean by that is, so I wrote 3 books from Awst. The first is an essay collection. And that essay collection looked outward. My connections with other people. The short story collection that looked at the other. I tried to kind of not think of myself. I tried to write from folks radically different than me. And then this last thing, To Those Bounded, which I'm reading from tonight, this is like the end of that body of work. And again, I'm kind of inward facing, but with knowledge from the previous books. So just the background on that. To Those Bounded, I had one central thesis. I wanted to investigate or interrogate the myth of Black male criminality. I wanted to know why I didn't like myself that much, and if reasons outside of me that have prompted me not to like myself. So I'm going to read some short essays from this, and hopefully you like it. I'm going to start with the opening, and it doesn't have a name. Run. Until the skin sweats blood, keep going. Until the heart dries out, move. Until your weary muscles flake apart and the bones in your limbs splinter and crack. Then go on. Because although they've always stalked you, you hear them behind you now. Push harder. Ignore the leaves and branches crunching under the feet of your pursuer. Run until the trees and the foliage blur green. Do not turn to follow the sounds of your peers splashing through the creek to avoid capture. The sounds of friends dropping cases of beer and the frenzied rustling through the forest shrubbery to hide themselves. Do not stop. Don't fret for your fellow miners. Must escape. Because history proves arrest could have different, more violent results for you. Your detention would last long after your release. Dismiss the idea, the inevitability of your punishment, and that something inherent about you needs to be confined. Speed up. Go farther. Don't falter. Don't trip. Run. Be quicker. Faster, strive harder, find new stamina, never rest. Be better, or you'll be gone. This next essay I'm going to read, it's called Bounded Functions. Shout out to my oldest friend, Charlie, tonight. I'm sitting at a desk alone in a classroom smaller than any other classroom in my middle school. Every half an hour, a teacher or school resource officer enters to make sure I'm doing the math work I need to complete so I'm not a child left behind. I'm in the 8th grade, and I'm on the verge of staying in the 8th grade for another year. Still out of class because of suspensions, because I keep getting in fights with other students and verbal altercations with my teachers. Like how I called one of my media center a despicable bourgeois asshole, laughing when I asked if the school had a hard copy of the Communist Manifesto by Engels and Marx. And like the time I hooked my fingers behind the front teeth of a boy who stole my chocolate milk, and I dragged him several feet from his blood-drooling mouth. Out of school suspensions haven't done much for correcting my bursts of anger. I've received so many weeks away that the vice principal thought to confine me in school suspension. So now I'm sitting in this mini classroom. I come to this room in the morning and I don't leave until the buses arrive at the end of the day. I'm escorted to the bathroom if I need to go, and lunch is brought to me from the cafeteria on a tray. I sit quietly, no talking, nothing to do but count the clicks of the wall clock and complete the assignments provided by my teachers. I'm doing the work. I don't want to return to middle school next year. I want to go on to high school. Last week, the vice principal told my mom and me that the school had reached out to county administrators and recommended me for expulsion from the school district. The vice principal used the word dangerous a lot. Part of me liked that, but another part didn't. What made me dangerous? I never started. Someone else always laughs at how I dress or look or act or smell. They call me an Oreo or say I'm trying to be white, and I get mad. And the vice principal said my size makes a difference. I'm bigger than most every other student and large enough to intimidate some of the teachers. The last time my mom was called to school to pick me up for fighting, she refused. She said she was tired of it. It being me, I guess. And my dad had to come get me. And as he escorted me out of the front office, threatening under his breath to whip me with his belt as soon as we got back to his apartment, we were stopped at the front entrance of the building by the vice principal. She spoke to my father like she was a family friend or an auntie. She said she didn't mean to assume, but my behavior suggested I probably could use more discipline at home. And my dad's brow furrowed, and his eyes turned to lasers he might have wished to shoot through her. And she said, "Our children need to act better, Mr. Quist. They can't just behave the way some of these other students do. Do you understand?" And my dad said he did understand. And we shuffled quietly to his taxi to head to his place and wait until my mom could pick me up after work. And at his apartment, I braced myself for blows from his heavy palms and raps from his knuckles. Never came. He sat with me in the living room for a bit. He studied me while I chewed the skin around my lips and tried to avoid eye contact. And my dad asked, "Why do you keep getting into trouble?" And I said, "I don't know. I just feel angry all the time." And my dad nodded like he understood. And he said, "It's hard to be good all the time." Sitting here in school suspension, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about the vice principal's words and how my dangerousness means I have to miss out on the end of this year school trip to Adventure World Amusement Park. I'm trying to force myself to focus on quadratic equations and graphing functions, but the slopes and rises just remind me of roller coasters all the other 8th graders are riding elsewhere. I flip my calculator upside down and try to make words. 58008, boobs. 7734, hell. 35007. Loose. I try for the longest word I can with the keypad. 55373-604. It looks like hopeless. Scan the room and every empty desk around me. I lean back in my own seat and my glance slides up to the ceiling, and then eventually back down to the math paper in front of me. I've struggled with algebra and geometry. I strain to understand why I would ever need to solve for X, or how that hidden value could have a single answer. My math teacher had recently talked about these things called bounded functions. How, when put on a graph, these functions have limits that prevent them from going too far one way or another. But I don't understand. I asked my teacher who sets the limits, and the teacher said it depends. And I said, on what? And the teacher said, the needs of the desired functions. I'm stuck in a giant 3D graph that fills the room. On the graph, a dark coaster car bounces between parallel dotted lines that never intersect. There is no rest. I get dizzy from the darting between limits, up and down, up and down, forever. So I'm going to read one more. And this is, spoilers, this is like kind of the conclusion of the book. But I wanted to read it because so many of you that are here tonight are people that I know through writing and teaching. And I just am really glad that I'm not alone, you know? So this is for you all. Love you. This is called November 2020. On election day, I woke up around 4 a.m. and I made some tea and toast. And I grabbed my voter registration card, wallet, cap, and a face mask. I prepared myself to encounter voter suppression. I imagined having to walk past armed Trump army poll watchers who might look at the color of my skin and try to intimidate me. I got to my polling place, a Lutheran church, around 5:30. And I was surprised by the absence of Make America Great Again hats. I was surprised to see so many young people, college kids, shuffling in their sweats and leggings against the early morning chill. I even spotted one of my former students. I can't recall ever being so eager to stand in line. While waiting to vote, I read Memoirs of a Polar Bear by EcoTheo on my e-reader. I highlighted the following quote with my thumbs. She says, "And if we don't get this not very much exactly right, we will not survive." And I read that line over and over again. Thought about it, and my turn came to take a ballot. I didn't cast my vote until close to 7 a.m. By then, the line of voters had begun wrapping around the church. On the drive home, I listened to the song America from the 1961 West Side Story motion picture soundtrack. And a hopeful smile spread across my face as Rito Moreno sang, "Life can be bright in America." In 2016, I published a personal essay collection called Harbors. It was about a lot of things, but mostly it was about, as W.B. Du Bois puts it, how it feels to be a problem. Since Trump's inauguration in 2017, I've realized I'm trying to answer how it feels to be told that I am a problem. What does it mean to be reminded daily through national rhetoric, institutional regulation, and public demonstrations that large segments of this population don't want me in America and don't know what to do with the fact that I am? On election day, after I returned home from voting, I took my dog out in the front yard. A large pickup truck with a pole for a flag depicting Trump as Rambo Drove past twice, the driver staring at me behind his sunglasses. The same truck returned later the day, passing my house at a crawl with a dozen other vehicles sporting Trump flags and blaring car horns. And peering through my blinds at the parade, I remembered the lyrics from West Side Story again. Life is all right in America if you are white in America. And here you are free if you have pride, as long as you stay on your own side. The Friday evening after Election Day, I was sulking about the close margins of the voting results. And to raise my spirits, my partner recommended I reread The Carrying, poems by Ada Limon. And in the piece, A New National Anthem, I felt myself lifted. I raced a highlighter over the line, like a match being lit in an endless cave, the song that says my bones are your bones, and your bones are my bones. And I felt a sense of hope for my country again. And that hope was rewarded the next morning during a remote video meeting when one of my colleagues interrupted a point he was making to let us know the Guardian has just called it. And as my peers vacillated between beaming and bemoaning the fact that Biden was not their ideal choice, I remembered West Side Story and Anita and Bernardo singing on an NYC rooftop. Life can be bright in America, I thought to myself. If we might fight for America. In the months leading up to November 2020, as hundreds of thousands gathered publicly, risking their health during a global pandemic to demonstrate their support for racial equality, I was unhopeful that these outpourings would lead to more progressive votes on Election Day. I was happy to be wrong. The world saw a victory against flagrant bigotry, as Biden said in his acceptance speech. He said it's a bend in the moral universe towards justice. I believe there could be greater triumphs ahead if we continue to show up for each other. I'm not always sure how to do this, but I think showing up means being seen, heard, counted, even on days when numbers don't seem to matter as much. I think it means I keep living and writing to the next line, paragraph, and page every day. I think it means I continue teaching and inventing new ways to challenge as well as include. These methods are the best I've found to provide myself and others space to redefine what and who we want to be. I'm often tempted to hide and only do what I must to survive. I experience frequent and overt resistance to my attempts to help rear a new kind of nation, where its citizens are its purpose, and no one is made to feel like a problem. And in these moments, I try to remember that the fight to make life all right in America is not a solitary effort, just as the benefits should extend beyond the individual. There are others. They are toiling beside me, and they are shining a light in an endless cave, and they are sharing their bones. Thank you.
Incredible. That was so powerful. It was beautiful, Donald. Thank you. So we've heard from all these three wonderful readers. It's been an amazing reading selections on this. We do have a few questions that I'd like to pose to the writers before, if we have time, we'll see how the time goes, and we may have time for a couple of questions from the audience, but we'll go ahead and start with these. So the first question I have for y'all, in a recent interview, Donald said that the best piece of writing advice came to him from Kwame Dawes, who wrote, "All memory is fiction." He spoke of how, as a young writer, it made him realize that his perception was not necessarily reality for others, and how that has made him more thoughtful and nuanced in his approach to nonfiction. So maybe if each of you could talk about what this line means to you, and have you ever felt conflicted writing about people in your life, and how do you deal with it? And do you find that it's sometimes easier to write honestly in fiction or poetry than in nonfiction? So, Andrew, would you like to go first?
I'd love to go first. First, thank you so much, Donald. That was beautiful. And thank you, Esteban, as well. That was really touching. Yeah, it feels weird to like dive right into questions, but I know we have to because of time, but I'm still kind of marinating a little bit. But yeah, I really like this question. And I don't know if I can really address it so directly, but maybe indirectly. For several years now, in my poetry writing, I've been using the we voice instead of the I, which you may have noticed in what I was reading. Like in the title, we are invited to climb, or we accidentally imagine, just trying to avoid the word I or my or me. And I don't really know exactly why I started doing this originally. I think it may have come out of some kind of discomfort about talking about myself, serious middle child syndrome, wondering why my first person sort of inner thoughts are any more worth sharing than anybody else's. But I've come to think about this in a lot of different ways, and I think it's interesting because by thinking and writing in terms of we, that is you and me, Becky, or you and me, Donald, and Esteban, and anyone in the Zoom or watching a recording, that can be we. In thinking in terms of that we, I'm challenged to center other experiences than my own and the perspectives of others, readers and non-readers who may not even be actually reading the work. This is obviously impossible. I can't really speak for everybody. I can barely speak for myself. So, but at the same time, I think it's really interesting because in this struggle to earn that we, I think I've gained a lot of insights into what it means to be people together and how to think about people collectively.
Thank you, Andrew. Donald or Estevan, who would like to go next on this? Donald?
Sure, yeah. I'm going to try to go bit by bit. So I guess the first part of the question is what does all memories fiction mean to me? When Kwame said that, it kind of helped me understand that my perception is not necessarily a reality for another person. And so when writing nonfiction especially, I have to be mindful of that like how I remember it might not be the way another person remembered it. And I have to do a little bit more due diligence than I would in fiction, even though in fiction, oftentimes you're still drawing from reality. So I think it coming from that place of like caution, even in fiction, is super important to do, especially we can get into areas where we're telling stories that might not belong to us. I feel weird about that, but so all memories fiction just kind of was a very helpful maxim to make me kind of check myself. How this kind of played out, I think you asked, was there ever a time where you didn't, or you were nervous to write about people in your life? So in Harbors, I wrote that thing like I didn't think anybody would ever see it. I just wrote it. And it ended up hurting a lot of people I love because of it. And I regret that. Working on this new collection, I had to listen more carefully to like the nuance of what all memories fiction can mean. Like, so if I'm writing about family, if I'm writing about an ex-lover, I need to check myself. I need to make sure I run stuff by them so that they get a chance to enter a dialogue with me before I put this out into the world, because there's a lot of power behind publishing. And when you put something on paper, there's power in that. When you send it out into the world, it becomes a record, and it can be like a defining piece. You know, writing has been, people's histories and people's memories have been used to define entire populations of people. Like So you got to be careful. And so remembering that all memory is fiction, I think, is a helpful tool that writers should put up front before they should write through that filter. Just remember, like, it just because it was fact to you doesn't mean it was fact to everyone else. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, Andrew, it's so interesting that you mentioned using the we in your poetry, because I've tended to recently, over the past few years, use the you, the second person, only because I think it creates a little bit more distance for me as opposed to the I, in terms of, like, I can create enough distance on the page for me to feel a part of it, but not necessarily super a part of it, not invested to the point that I feel like I'm just pouring my heart and soul. I mean, I definitely want this poem to be, or the poem, whatever poems I write, to connect with others. So a little bit more universal in that approach. But I almost consulted with nobody when I wrote this book. Part of the reason was specifically because I started this book in grad school, and I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. It was just sort of like a practice before it actually became a reality. But I always, I guess, like, foreground the collection by saying, like, hey, this is my experience. This is sort of, and it isn't always right. And I think, like, when I had to fill in certain gaps, right, memory is not always perfect. I think I have like a pretty decent memory, but I definitely have to fill in some gaps sometimes, and what I think is correct, and that might not necessarily always be others' perception. And so my mom ended up reading this, and she was like, oh, I don't remember that. And I was like, I kind of do remember it this way, but obviously we might have different interpretations. And if it is that way, then we can have these, like, not necessarily two truths, but these two versions that I think eventually lead to some version of the truth. And that's what I'm definitely interested in.
Interesting. Our second question is, if you'd like, can each of you tell us about an ideology or philosophy you subscribe to and what role it plays in your writing and art making? So who would like to go first on that? Hands? Okay, Andrew, you want to start us off again?
I'm happy to go first. I feel, well, anyways. I was gonna wait in case we could, like, scatter it up a little bit, but we can do that. In terms of, like, philosophies, I don't know about ideology, but for a long time I've resonated very deeply with Taoism, which is the ancient Chinese philosophy of the water course way. Or if you've seen the yin yang, it's related to that. The whole philosophy is basically about recognizing the contradictions in life on the smallest scales to the biggest scales, and trying to reconcile the fact that you can't have something without nothing, and how that plays out in day-to-day life. So beyond inspiring me to study this teaching by doing things like making interpretations of the Tao Te Ching, which I was presenting earlier, it definitely informs, like, a lot of what I do, if not pretty much everything. So for instance, the book We're Invited to Climb that I was reading from, like I mentioned, is generative poetry, and it's kind of a result of a collaboration between myself and random numbers, which are totally outside of my control. So you have, on the one hand, intention, and then you have the intentional non-intention. And what does intentional non-intention mean? I don't know. So every time you visit weareinvitedtoclimb.org, it's going to regenerate the whole book for you. And in doing this, I can kind of get at the Wu Wei elements of Taoism, which is kind of roughly translated as action by inaction, or non-action action. So doing something without doing something, and playing around with that kind of impossible state. And by the way, this is not my invention. This goes way back to, like, 1950, when John Cage, the composer, started using chance operations in his music with very similar motivations. So his practice was grounded in Zen Buddhism, which is very, very heavily informed by Taoism. And when he did his chance processes, or what he called them chance operations, this was before computers, so he was using the Chinese book of divinations, the I Ching, and basically throwing dice, or I think he was flipping coins for it, basically to create random numbers and referring those back to the I Ching and asking the I Ching what to do in the music. So this is a long tradition, and I've just been playing around with it more in the context of poetry, which is a little less often done. But there's still a decent amount of other people who are involved in that kind of thing. And if you're interested in this kind of stuff, the book appendix has a little essay talking about the process and some of the history and like other people involved in it. So if that's interesting to you, you can check that out in the physical book or on the website or both.
Thank you, Andrew.
That's amazing.
It's pretty awesome.
It's amazing.
I love John Cage so much.
Yes. Yeah.
So interesting. Now, did Donald or Esteban, did either of you want to talk about that?
Sorry, I have my, this one is
Cute.
pretty attached to me. Her name is Iggy, by the way. But I think I'm not entirely sure I have a specific philosophy or ideology. I was always reminded, I guess, like in grad school, of the language poets, which I actually love the language poets. I love like Lynn Hygenian and all them. But I think what always kind of put me off a little bit for them is that they had to create like an entire different philosophy in order to sort of justify their work. And I think like the thing that I think a professor said, it was like less gimmick, more heart. And I was always interested in that, right? Like how can I, not that I guess like gimmicks or different things don't work, because I definitely love like reading experimental writing. Andrew, I love the work that you're doing, like, and the work that can be done and what's going to be done in the future. But I definitely, at least in my approach, it's always like, how can I write from a perspective that's at least true to me and that hopefully other people can connect to.
Right. And Donald, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I try not to be prescriptive or anything, and like I tend to be wary of ideology, but the rule from design that form follows function, that's how I approach anything that I'm doing. So if there's, before I even start writing or making anything, it needs to have some type of purpose, and that purpose has to extend beyond myself. So once I figure out what that purpose is, then I need to find the frame that best accompanies it. So, and to those bounded, the essays are numbered. They were numbered reflections, and I kind of got the idea from that from Blaise Pascal, who wrote Pensées. I was like, oh, I'll just, I was writing down notes about how it feels to be Black in America, but I didn't know, is this a book? Like, I don't know. These journal entries, I don't know what this thing is. But once I found the point that I wanted to make, then I was able to find the form. And so I always think it's important, like form should follow whatever form you choose. And that includes genre, shape, however it appears on the page needs to speak to the message that you're trying to convey. And so I guess that also kind of gets kind of preachy, because like I feel like before I write something, there has to be like there's to be meaning behind it, I guess. Yeah. I love this cat.
I'm sorry.
I love it.
Hey, I love seeing the pets. It's so
He's
cute.
really-
Yeah.
The dog is seeing the cat.
I don't normally keep this curtain closed, but I have it closed for this.
So she's like,
Background,
what
but-
the heck is that happening there?
Yeah, it's
Open this up.
Something's going on over
Something's
there.
Yeah.
So the last question that I have for you is, it's when you were younger, what did you think it meant to be a writer? Have you come to find that it's different than what you thought? And if so, what has surprised you the most in the course of your writing career? So Esteban, you want to start this time?
Yeah, I could go at this time. I think, especially starting off in poetry, I just had this like, oh my gosh, it's kind of embarrassing, but this is like a very idealistic view of what poetry was, or what writing was. I think I thought I'd be wearing a whole lot more scarves than I actually wear, and that's not the case. But I think what I didn't realize was the work that was behind it, right? There's not that there can't be like an emotional attachment to it, but at the end of the day, you've got to produce something and you've got to work for it. And I think that was the thing that if I could tell myself now from when I was a young writer, it's like, hey, buddy, you've got to put in some work. Not that I wasn't putting in the work, I think, but there's a lot more to come and there's a lot more to learn, and you should always keep on learning as well. And also, and I say this probably every single time, but read. Like, there's nothing better. I'm a better reader, I think, than I am a writer. I definitely am a better reader than I am a writer. And if you're not reading, then you're not writing, I think, in the way that I think you should be writing.
I love that so much. I'm going to go back and amend the previous question. I am prescriptive about one thing, and if I'm a jerk about this in classrooms, if I'm teaching, you should be reading more than you're writing, like 100%. I'm a snob about that. You need to be reading widely. You need to be reading a lot. So yeah, that's a rule. We were talking about success. I knew I wanted to be a writer since I was 5. And I had no idea what exactly that meant. My mom, she gave me a typewriter when I was a little kid, and I don't know why she did it, but she did. And so success has changed a lot, you know, in the last 30 something years. It's probably going to change some more, but right now, what success means to me is being able to make work, like just the ability to engage with it and have the space and the time. So success to me is any situation that I can make in which I can protect time to read and write. So if that involves money, that's great. If it doesn't, that's also great, as long as I have that space and time. That's a success story. If you have that, that's a privilege. If you can find a way to build that into your life, you're doing it. Like you're doing it. You're living the dream. You're a writer, and yeah. So I guess I just want to keep being able to do that, or positioning myself to better do that, and I'd be able to consider myself a success.
Wonderful. Andrew, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think we're all talking basically the same things here. Because yeah, I was gonna say, growing up, I thought writers spent most of their time writing, or at least reading. But it turns out you spend most of your time hustling to publish and sell your work. And when you're not doing that, you're doing a bunch of unrelated jobs to pay the rent. And it's definitely not what you think is going to happen when you are going into this. I feel like a lot of us are taught that writers kind of just exist apart from the world, observing it and writing about it without being caught up in what's actually happening inside it. But yeah, especially, you know, last 30 years or so, with the big 5 publishers taking over pretty much everything. I hate to say the C word, but capitalism is very, very deeply penetrated in the art form these days. You know, not just writing, of course, but all art, but in particular, the less profitable ones like writing and like poetry, essay collections, things like that. And I think that's why it's really important to support independent presses, bookstores like Awst, like Split Lip, like Malvern. I think these kind of horizontal structures, or more horizontal bottom-up type of structures, are really, really important. And it's the only way that writers can get back to writing.
I think that's
Absolutely.
great. And it has been a very interesting journey for me when Joe said he was going to start this bookstore focusing on small independent presses, and just small independent presses is what he wanted. And I said, really? Okay. And I kind of went along. He said, I want you to manage the store for me. I was like, okay, we'll see how this goes. But I would never have expected the support that we've had from people in Austin and from other areas as well. And it's been a great journey to find out. Joe knew about these small publishers because he has one, he's a publisher himself with Host Publications, but I really didn't. And I'm a librarian. I was really more used to the larger presses. So it was a great experience for me. It's been a wonderful learning experience to read so much amazing work from these small independent presses. And Awst Press has been a great addition to the Austin scene. And it's been wonderful to know that they're local here with us. So it's terrific to have them. So, I mean, all that being said, we're a little bit after 8 p.m. and I don't really see a lot of questions in the chat. Though if y'all get a chance to read the chat comments, I think it would be great because I think you'll enjoy what people are saying. Hopefully you readers have been having a chance to to read through those because it's been very nice. And I want to just thank everyone for coming. Oh, okay, there's one question. We have to ask Donald who his favorite sister is.
It's funny because she told me she was going to ask this question. And I kind of believed her, but she didn't. My favorite sister. It's too hard to choose. Like I can't. Yeah, probably Tia. Yeah, Tia Mowry.
Well, okay, good for you. Anyway, well, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. And I don't know, Esteban, Andrew, Donald, did y'all want to say anything before we tie this up?
Just thank you again. Thank you, Malvern. Thank you, Awst. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Esteban. Thank all of you for coming. And this made my week. I appreciate it.
We're so glad. And it was a wonderful, wonderful reading. Thank you all so much. And we hope to see you soon in Malvern Books. We'll be having this video posted on the Malvern Books YouTube channel. If you'd like to take a look at it, feel free to